To all my SDA fellow brethren out there, I know sometimes we tend to get paranoid about religious freedom, and we interpret religious freedom through the lens, a very narrow lens of Sabbath, freedom to worship on Sabbath and Sunday laws, and every time I see something that political powers do that threaten religious freedom on a broad sense, I always find some folks within our community that try to interpret everything in the lens of Sabbath observance, and we're not going to be able to worship the way we want on the day we want, etc. And then there's this paranoia of persecution and suffering, a time of trouble as such as there never was. and, and, and I just want to ask a couple of questions, right? So first of all, persecution for Sabbath observance, where did that come from? Because I don't remember that there was ever mention of that in the Bible. Now, I believe it comes from one of your prophetess's writings. The Bible does talk about, Jesus himself talks about being persecuted for righteousness' sake. But to equate righteousness with the narrow lens of Sabbath observance and interpret Jesus' words of persecution for righteousness as persecution for keeping the Sabbath, that's a very, very narrow lens, right? I mean, at least I think so. Because keeping the Sabbath is a doctrinal position, and righteousness cannot, should not be, in my opinion, be limited to doctrinal purity or doctrinal adherence. Righteousness, on the other hand, is doing the right thing. And Jesus makes that distinction very clear, right? That there are times when righteousness clashes with doctrinal adherence. And in those cases, Jesus always puts righteousness, doing the right thing, ahead of doctrinal adherence. And that was the big beef between him and the Pharisees and the church people of the day. I mean, he said things like, he said things like, it is lawful to do right, do good on the Sabbath. And so even if this persecution for keeping the Sabbath is somehow grounded in a biblical premise, right? Then persecution for keeping the Sabbath does not represent some badge of honor that validates you as a righteous person. Because you could adhere to the letter of the law doctrinally and still not be righteous. Oh, you didn't know that? Okay. Well, newsflash. The way we interpret the political, social events of the day and sort of frame them in the context of religious freedom vis-a-vis keeping the Sabbath, and how we will be like that remnant who stands up as God's final chosen people because we keep the Sabbath, and then we will be persecuted for same. That could be misleading. I'd rather be persecuted for righteousness' sake than persecuted for keeping the Sabbath. I don't want to be persecuted either way. But if I had to choose, persecution for righteousness. And that's the problem. That's the fantasy that I think some of us live under, right? Time of persecution is coming. The Sunday laws are coming. Project 25 is going to take away our religious freedoms, i.e., our ability to worship the way we want on the day we want. And we focus on the wrong thing. And quite frankly, nobody's going to persecute you for worshiping on Saturday versus Sunday if you fall in line with the social political messaging of the day. So let me break that down. If you fall in line with abuse of foreigners and immigrants, and you worship on Sabbath, Saturday, nobody ain't persecuting you. If you fall in line with abolishing DEI, and you fall in line and you say nothing against discrimination against minorities, women's, disabled people, if you say nothing against that and you worship on the Sabbath, ain't nobody persecuting you. You understand what I'm saying? So let's take it down a bit about this whole religious freedom thing, particularly through this narrow lens of what day you worship on or not.